There is a version of you that has sat across from someone and felt completely lost, not because you didn't understand the words they were saying, but because something underneath those words didn't add up, the smile that arrived a half second too late, the laugh that was just a little too loud, the way their eyes moved to the floor the moment you asked how they were really doing. You felt it, you just didn't know what to call it. Most of us spend our entire lives learning how to speak. We practice sentences, refine our vocabulary, rehearse what we'll say before difficult conversations. But no one ever teaches us how to listen to what isn't being said. No one teaches us to read the silence between words, the tension inside a forced smile, the story hidden inside someone's oldest habit. Nietzsche did. Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't just a philosopher. He was a diagnostician of the human soul. While others were writing about morality and God and reason, Nietzsche was watching people, watching how they moved, how they lied, how they loved, how they suffered. And what he found disturbed him, fascinated him, and ultimately gave him 18 truths about human psychology that most people spend a lifetime never discovering. This is not a list. This is not a quick break, and you skim for entertainment and then forget by tomorrow. What you're about to hear is a framework for seeing, and once you truly see, I promise you, you cannot go back to not seeing. But before we go there, I need to say something first. If you have ever felt manipulated by someone who spoke beautifully but meant nothing they said, this is for you. If you have ever extended your heart to someone only to realize, months or years later, that you were responding to a performance, this is for you. If you have ever felt crazy for sensing something was wrong when everyone else insisted everything was fine, this is especially for you. Because you weren't crazy, you were just missing the language. Nietzsche understood something about human beings that is almost unbearably true. He understood that people do not show you who they are. They show you who they need to be, and there is a profound difference between those two things. Think of it like this. Imagine every person you have ever met is carrying a heavy coat, not because they're cold, but because at some point in their past, the world felt like winter, and they learned, young and fast, and without anyone explaining why, that the coat was protection. So they never took it off, even on warm days, even in rooms full of people who loved them. Even when they desperately wanted to, they couldn't, because taking it off meant being seen, and being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability, somewhere along the way, became synonymous with danger. That coat is what Nietzsche called the mask, and here is the first thing he wants you to understand. The mask is not a lie. It is a survival strategy. When someone smiles at you with their mouth but not their eyes, when someone says, "I'm fine," with a voice that is doing everything in its power to hold itself together, when someone laughs too quickly at their own pain, they are not deceiving you out of malice. They are deceiving themselves out of necessity, and that distinction changes everything about how you respond to people. Because the moment you understand that most human behavior is fear and costume, you stop taking things personally. You stop reacting to the performance, and you start looking for the performer underneath. This is truth number one. Everyone wears a mask to survive, not because they're dishonest, but because they're human. Now here is where it gets deeper. Nietzsche observed something that psychologists wouldn't formally describe until decades later, the concept of projection. And he put it bluntly, what someone hates in others reveals what they are hiding in themselves. Let that sit for a moment. Think about the person in your life who criticizes others the most. The one who cannot finish a conversation without tearing someone down, pointing out a flaw, mocking someone's ambition or appearance or softness. We tend to read that person as cruel, as superior, as cold, but Nietzsche would ask you to read them differently. He would ask you to hear the confession underneath the criticism, because when someone cannot stop mocking vulnerability in others, they are usually terrified of their own. When someone fixates on the dishonesty of the people around them, they are often managing a truth inside themselves they haven't been able to face. The criticism isn't aimed at the other person, not really. It is aimed inward at the part of themselves they are most ashamed of and projected outward so they don't have to feel its weight alone. This is not a metaphor. This is one of the most consistent patterns in human psychology. Judgment is almost always autobiography. So the next time someone goes out of their way to tear something down, don't be distracted by the target. Follow the arrow backward. It will always point to the shooter. There is a third truth that most people overlook because we have been trained, deeply and systematically trained, to trust words above all else. We are a species of language. We celebrate eloquence. We admire articulation. We give people the benefit of the doubt when their sentences are constructed well. But Nietzsche didn't trust language. He saw it for what it often is, not a vehicle for truth, but a vehicle for management. A tool we use to control how others perceive us, to smooth over the edges of what we actually feel, to present the version of reality we have decided is most survivable. And so he turned his attention to silence, because silence, unlike language, cannot be edited. When someone pauses too long before answering a simple question, that pause is speaking. When someone deflects a conversation that has gotten too close to something real, that deflection is a confession. When someone gives a short, rehearsed answer to something that deserves depth, the rehearsal itself tells you everything. Truth number 3, silence reveals more than words ever will. A person who is genuinely at peace with something speaks about it naturally, without tension, without preparation. But a person who is avoiding something, a grief, a fear, a truth they haven't made peace with, will give themselves away in the exact moments they say the least. The body knows what the mind is still trying to deny. And if you stop listening to sentences and start listening to hesitation, to deflection, to the specific topics that someone never touches, you will begin to hear the parts of the story they never agreed to tell. Now I want to talk about something that is uncomfortable, something that many people struggle to accept because it challenges the way we are taught to honor goodness and virtue. Nietzsche believed that excessive virtue is often disguised vanity. He was not dismissing morality. He was not saying that kindness is fake. What he was saying is that there is a specific type of loudness around certain people's goodness that deserves attention. The person who corrects everyone publicly, the one who cannot witness a moral discussion without centering themselves in it. The one who wears their ethics like a badge that needs constant polishing in front of others. Nietzsche called this the will to power in disguise. Because real goodness, the kind that comes from a place of genuine care, does not need an audience. It does not perform. It does not keep score. It simply acts and moves on. But the goodness that announces itself, that demands to be witnessed, that positions the person as morally elevated above those around them, that goodness is often about something else entirely, about insecurity that has found a socially acceptable shell to hide inside, about a hunger for superiority that has dressed itself in the language of virtue. And this is important, not so you can distrust kindness, but so you can distinguish between the person who gives because it fills them with quiet joy, and the person who gives because being seen as a giver is the only way they know how to feel worthy. One of the most quietly devastating truths Nietzsche understood is the fifth one, and it is this: people don't lie to you first. They lie to themselves. The most convincing lies you will ever encounter are not the ones people tell deliberately. They are the ones people have told themselves so many times for so long with such emotional necessity that they no longer recognize them as lies. They have become identity. They have become fact. When someone says, "I'm over it," about something they clearly aren't over, they are not lying to manipulate you. They have simply built a story about themselves that the "I'm over it" version of themselves needs in order to function. When someone says, "I don't care what people think," while their behavior reveals a person who is acutely, painfully attuned to what people think, they believe what they are saying. They have to believe it because the alternative, admitting how much external perception shapes them, is a vulnerability they are not yet equipped to hold. This is what Nietzsche called self-deception, and he didn't describe it as moral failure. He described it as a defense, a deeply human way of managing a reality that would otherwise be too painful to inhabit consciously. So when someone's story doesn't quite add up, when their words and their patterns are slightly out of alignment, do not assume they are trying to manipulate you. Assume instead that you are seeing the gap between who they are and who they have decided they need to be. And that gap is where the truth lies. The sixth truth is one that many people feel intuitively but rarely know how to articulate. Nietzsche articulated it with a precision that still stings. Where someone performs superiority, you will almost always find, underneath it, a profound fear of being ordinary. The person who cannot stop listing their accomplishments in a conversation, the one who finds ways to subtly diminish others, to position themselves just slightly above the room. The one who needs to win not because winning brings them joy, but because not winning makes them feel erased. These are not confident people. Confidence does not need comparison. Confidence does not need an audience. Confidence is the quiet certainty that you do not need to prove anything to anyone in this room. What performance needs, relentless, exhausting, desperate performance, is reassurance. And what it is running from is the terror that without the accomplishments, without the status, without the external validation, there might be nothing left. That the self underneath the performance might be insufficient. Nietzsche saw this. He saw how often power is overcompensation. How often the person demanding the most respect in a room is the one who respects themselves the least, privately, in the hours when there is no one watching. And here is what I want you to hold as we go deeper into these truths. Reading people is not about judgment. It is not about seeing through someone so you can feel superior to them. It is about something far more sacred than that. It is about learning to extend compassion to the parts of people they cannot show you directly. It is about understanding that what arrives as aggression is often terror. That what arrives as coldness is often old grief. That what arrives as arrogance is often a child still trying to prove they were worth keeping. When you begin to see people this way, not as their behavior, but as the wound that is driving their behavior, something in you quiets. The defensiveness softens, the judgment dissolves, and what replaces it is something that Nietzsche, despite his reputation, deeply believed in. Grace, but we have only just begun, because what we have covered so far are the masks, the surface patterns. The first layer of what Nietzsche observed. In a moment, we are going to go underneath the masks, into the place where behavior stops being performance and starts being confession. Into the territory where the deepest fears lie, not the fears we acknowledge, not the ones we name, but the ones so old and so embedded that most people act them out for decades without ever knowing they are doing it. There is a specific mechanism. Nietzsche described the way unconscious fear becomes the engine of nearly every significant human action. And once you understand this mechanism, you will never watch human behavior the same way again, Because here is the thing about the mask. It is not passive. It does not simply sit on someone's face and wait to be seen. It moves. It makes decisions. It drives people towards certain kinds of relationships and away from others. It writes the scripts of entire lives, entire patterns, entire decades of repeated experience that the person cannot understand, cannot escape, and often cannot even see. And the question that unlocks all of it is not what do they want? The question is, what are they afraid of losing? That is where the truth lies, not in ambition, not in desire, but in the oldest, deepest fear a person carries. The fear of abandonment, the fear of humiliation, the fear of being seen as small, as broken, as not enough. Every over-explanation, every need to dominate a conversation, every yes that quietly meant no, trace it back far enough and you will always find a fear, not a want. And here is where something shifts, because once you understand that most human behavior is not strategy but survival, you stop asking, why are they doing this to me? And you start asking what happened to them that made this feel necessary. That single shift from accusation to curiosity is the beginning of real wisdom. Nietzsche believed that people do not act out their beliefs, they act out their childhoods. The person who was never truly heard becomes the adult who interrupts. The person who was punished for softness becomes the adult who calls emotion weakness. The person who had to earn love, who learned that affection was conditional, becomes the adult who performs endlessly in relationships, in careers, in the quiet theater of their own mind, never quite believing the applause is real. They are not choosing these patterns, they are repeating them. And repetition, Nietzsche said, is confession. Every pattern a person lives inside is a story they are still trying to finish. A wound still asking to be witnessed. When you finally see this in others and eventually in yourself, something extraordinary happens. You stop being a judge, you become a witness, and witnessing, true witnessing, is one of the rarest and most healing things one human being can offer another. If this way of seeing people resonated somewhere deep in you, stay close. There is more to uncover about envy, about silence, about the soul beneath every behavior. You are not alone in wanting to understand, and that wanting is already the beginning of something beautiful.